Hello all, another week and another new episode of Picard. This is Season 3, Episode 5, Imposters. You'll be pleased to hear that this time my neighbours didn't interrupt my viewing, which was a relief, and this was another fantastic episode. There was tension and drama, some great interactions, and I'm not ashamed to say I teared up at one point. So like the previous episodes, this had quite an emotional kick to it. And I think what they're doing quite well, apart from the beautiful characterisation, is that they're actually injecting a sense of tension and peril. There was literally a point in this where I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It was quite an edge of the seat moment. What I would say though is that the secondary story kind of lets it down. It feels a little like it's written by somebody else. It's very strange. There are moments within it that are really nice, but then there are moments that feel very predictable. It certainly feels like it's got more exposition dumps in it, and it certainly feels like it's dumbed down a little bit compared to the main story. There's also an element of familiarity with some of this story, and I can't go into detail. I will go into that in spoilers. Someone from Picard's past appears in this episode, and to me that was absolutely thrilling to see this person, and that is the heart of this particular episode. And it did make me wonder for people who maybe haven't got that level of knowledge as to whether this will resonate with them. I think the knowledge is the thing that really gives this its emotional power. And without that knowledge, I don't know whether that will hit or not. So a couple of negatives. The second's not necessarily one I felt. It's just something I was kind of aware of after watching it. Patrick Stewart's Picard is even more Picard than ever. Fantastic. Shaw is an absolute revelation. He's not in it much, but he's just brilliant. Going to get onto spoilers now. As usual, I won't necessarily do this in order of the episode because the secondary story is interspersed within it, and I'll deal with that at the end. So at the end of the last episode, they'd escaped Vatican the Shrike and basically put some distance between them and the anomaly. The episode starts with someone walking on the bridge and shooting the bridge crew. We pull back and see it's Jack, and we see the tendrils behind him that we've seen kind of crawling across the wall before. One of the crew, I don't know her name, says, "I know what you are." And then, it was obvious it was a dream, or rather a vision. And we're back with Jack in his quarters, but he's got a phaser in his hand. There's a meeting between Shaw, Riker, Picard and Seven, where they talk about having to deal with Starfleet. This is where Shaw comes in brilliantly because he's already called Starfleet and he is loving every moment of this, and it's just played so well. A Starfleet ship appears. I believe it was called the Excelsior. I might have to correct that. They're instructed that a commander and a security will be coming over in a shuttle, which they find odd. Meanwhile, Beverly is basically dissecting the changeling, and she discovers that it's able to replicate the internal organs. It can even replicate the effect of bleeding. And it's not until you get into a deep dissection that the organs and the body starts becoming changeling goo again, for want of a better phrase. So the commander comes on board, and it's Ensign Ro. Anyone who remembers TNG, she was a character I really liked because she kind of booked the command. Everyone else was very much by the book, although they bent the rules occasionally. She was one of those characters that challenged authority all the time. And she and Picard kind of had a bond. I never thought it was overly well developed. Her exit from the series seemed quite sudden. She was basically sent in to do a job of spying on a group, the Marquis, and ended up joining them and betraying Picard. So Picard is not thrilled to see her. Riker is shocked to see her. She insists on interviewing Picard on his own, and she proves he's not a changeling by cutting her hand, which obviously at this point we know is not proof of anything. Picard's already a little suspicious, and the paranoia starts ramping up, especially during the conversation when Beverly sends him a message telling him the changelings can completely mimic a human. And this is a beautiful conversation between the two. Picard is being Picard, very, very much back to the olden days, the strong, firm, commanding officer. And Ro is constantly asking about Jack, which Picard finds strange. Meanwhile, Jack is having more of these visions. Picard got Seven to dress him in a Starfleet uniform. He goes to the teleporter because Ro has commanded that the crew be teleported off, except for the essential personnel. And when they're being teleported, he just sees these tendril-like images in the teleporter, and he zaps out of reality for a second. In that unreality, he kills the transport operator. So there's something wrong with Jack. Go back to the conversation with Commander Rowe and Picard. There's some back and forth, and she insists on seeing the changeling. Obviously now Picard, after getting a message from Beverly, is thinking this isn't Rowe, because he notices she's not wearing the earring, and he remembers how important that was, being a Bajoran. So as they leave and start going towards the infirmary, Rowe pulls a gun on him and tells him that they need to go to the holodeck. He leads her in, flicks off the safety setting, and manages to pull a gun on her. And there follows this wonderfully emotive conversation where they're basically trying to size each other up to see if they're changelings, but it brings up so much stuff from their past about why she betrayed him, her morality. His leadership was stifling. He was trying to make her into a copy of him. A moment brilliantly echoed earlier in the episode when Picard suggested Jack that he join Starfleet, and how he felt betrayed and how he trusted her. And it's just lovely, it's emotional, and there's so much pathos in it. This is why I'm saying, will this have any resonance for anybody who isn't aware of her character? It feels very much like no one who comes to this new will have a clue what any of that is about. I imagine it'll have some degree of impact, but it won't necessarily have the impact that you would expect. They manage to convince each other that neither of them are a changeling because they get to the core of each other in this conversation. Rowe tells him that Starfleet is compromised, the changelings are everywhere. And this is what I mean about this being a little derivative, because it reminds me very much of Season 1, Episode 25, Conspiracy, where an alien parasite infiltrated Starfleet. Anyway, it turns out Rowe was beaming most of the crew off just to leave him the ones he could trust, and tells Picard to run. She commands her security team to go with her, and it's quite evident that these two are quite dodgy because they're basically acting a little bit shiftily. Picard rushes to the bridge once she's gone, tells Shaw they've got to get ready to run, that the Excelsior is commanded by changelings and they've got to go. Shaw is pretty dismissive of Picard and a little paralysed by uncertainty, I think. On the shuttle, they're asking why they've left without Jack. Next thing you know, they place something on the floor and teleport out. Rowe realises this is a bomb. The crew on the Titan are blocked from transporting her out. Her and Picard make their peace before she flies the shuttle into the nacelle of the Excelsior. Again, I'm sorry if I'm getting that name wrong. At this point, Shaw is relatively convinced that something else is going on here and decides they need to run. Meanwhile, the two security officers, in inverted commas, beam onto the Titan, find Jack. They beam in two more security officers. Obviously, all these are changelings. At which point, Jack has these flashes again. The red, the door. And it looks like he almost becomes another person, and he skillfully fights them and kills them. And he's staring down the corridor, he sees the tendrils leading towards a door, and then he snaps back and he's Jack again. So on the bridge, Shaw decides, probably should leg it. Just as the Excelsior starts to right itself and come to bear, the Titan goes to warp, just literally in the nick of time, and escapes. In the infirmary, the four changelings that were killed, Jack, Beverly, and the Doctor, I think Shaw was there as well. They're talking how remarkable it was, and Shaw's shocked there were this many changelings on one ship. He leaves, the Doctor leaves, which leaves Beverly with Jack, and she knows something's going on with him. She thinks it's something to do with the circumstances he's involved with. She doesn't realise what's actually going on. And I was so glad he told her. He doesn't go into detail at this point, but he says there's something very wrong with me. And that was a relief, because I thought we were going to get the trope of someone not telling people there's something going on, which just causes greater problems down the line. And I really get bored of that. There are so many series that rely on people not saying what's happening. Now, I'm not totally sure what it is myself. For a second there, I thought maybe he was a changeling in some way, that maybe the transporter, because the kind of tendril things appeared when the people were transported out. Whether something had happened with that, I don't know. However, Beverly reveals that Jack had nightmares when he was younger, which puts into question exactly who he is. So I'm intrigued. I'm interested to know what it is. And that's a good sign. So that story was great. As I say, the pathos and the power and the brilliant writing that a character is reintroduced Obviously, it relies on nostalgia and knowledge of the past of who that character is, but for her to be introduced and there be power in her death, I thought was quite impressive writing. With the Worf and Raffi story, I find it less impressive, and it definitely does feel like somebody else is writing it. There's literally a moment where something comes on the screen, which Worf and both her can hear, and then she turns around and says exactly the thing that's just been said on the screen. And I'm like, I don't need to hear that again. In the main story, there's none of this underlining of the narrative. It's just left for you to understand it. Whereas in this secondary story, there seems to be a lot of exposition and a lot of underlining points. Anyway, it opens with them having a fight. Worf's trying to hone her skills, and it's quite entertaining because it looks like she's doing really well against him. She's not. He's not letting her win, but he's giving her the sense that she has a chance so that she will fight properly, because there's a point at which he kind of just basically dismisses her in 3 seconds flat, and it's pretty obvious he was never really having trouble fighting her. They get a response from Worf's handler telling them to stop, which they refuse to do. They figure out who must have given the information to the Ferengi to give to the changelings to get into the Daystrom Institute, and decide to go and find him. They go back into the scuzzy part of the planet. Everyone runs away from them. The person they were looking for ambushes them, despite a plan by Worf, and forces them to fight each other. Again, as I say, this is very trite. Raffi stabs Worf. We know what's happening. It's all a trick. 2 of this man's people drag Worf off. Next thing you know, the lights go out. All of this man's people die around him, and Worf appears with a knife at his neck. It's very predictable. He then repeats something that Worf had said earlier in the episode. He reveals there is a way of getting into the Daystrom Institute and past the AI that guards it, and he agrees to give it to them, on the basis that Worf's got a knife to his neck. Something I forgot from earlier on is that Ro gave Picard her earring. My initial thought about that was that it had some significance because it was part of the conversation that they had earlier and also part of their relationship in TNG. But Riker knows what it actually is, which is a kind of a microchip which stores all the information and her entire investigation. They get an incoming call and there's Worf. Ro was Worf's handler, so bringing the 2 stories together. You may have noticed there's probably a few more negatives in this one. I really enjoyed the episode. I got really emotionally involved, but those moments detracted from it for me. And maybe the problem was that one of the YouTubers I watch was really enthused about this episode, saying it was a 10 out of 10, and maybe I got my expectations up a little bit too high. Still enjoyed it though, and still makes me look forward to what's going on, makes me intrigued and excited for the next episode. So I'll leave it there. If you've enjoyed my video, please like and subscribe. I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much for listening, and peace out.